What if the key to navigating midlife challenges isn't found in the latest trendy supplement or self help book, but rather in reconnecting with something that we've always had access to? In this eye opening episode of the Grace and Grit podcast, we are going to explore how nature therapy serves as incredibly powerful medicine for women in midlife, offering a path to help regulate the nervous system, restore hormonal balance, and rediscover your authentic, wild self during one of life's most transformative transitions. Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. Specifically, welcome to episode 376 of the Grace and Grit podcast. I am your host, Courtney Townley, and I am so delighted that today we are doing a deep dive into the healing power of nature with my incredible guest, Silke Lane, who brings a unique blend of nature therapy and life coaching specifically designed for women traveling through the wild of midlife. Now, I was first introduced to Silke through a friend, and the best word that I can use to describe how I felt when I first met her is enchanted. And I shared that with you. I don't know if you remember that from our conversation.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I do, yeah.
And I say enchanted because I feel like, number one, you help curate the space of safety, which is very evident from anyone who spends time with you, which I so appreciate. But then you also have just this wisdom about you that is so enchanting. And it also sparks a lot of curiosity for me. Like, I just want to know this person more. I want to understand how she came to be. So I wanted to share that from the outset of this episode because I do find you incredibly enchanting. So when Silke invited me to do a nature therapy session with her on Marshall Mountain, which is just outside of Missoula, of course I said yes. But I'm going to be totally honest. I was very stressed at the time because I had a lot going on, which typically I do. But at that time, I just had more than usual. And I did contemplate 1,000 different reasons for why I should bail. It's not a good time. It's a Saturday, all the things. But I ended up going, and I cannot tell you how incredibly grateful I am that I did go, because it was a morning in early summer, which if you've ever been to Northwest Montana, listeners may know that it's really cold here in the mornings of summer. So there was dew on the grass, but there was really nobody on the mountain. It was myself and one other participant. And you basically walked alongside of us all over Marshall Mountain, and you extended us a series of invitations. And I have to say that it really felt like I was experiencing nature in a way that I've never experienced it before. And I really want to stress how profound that is, because I've lived in nature, I feel like, for my whole life. I've lived in beautiful places. I've been a regular camper, outdoor enthusiast. I feel like I'm always in nature. But experiencing nature is something totally different. Mm-hmm. And that became really clear to me after that day on Marshall Mountain. And I want to start this episode, Silke, by saying thank you, because I really do think that you forever changed the way that I'm in relationship with nature. And for the listeners, I just want to elaborate and tell you that I did invite Silke to be a guest presenter at the Grace and Grit Montana retreat, which we've run for 2 years now here in Montana. And not only was she a presenter, but she kind of opened the entire event. We decided that because people were traveling from all over to come to this retreat, they needed a little bit of orientation. And what better way to orient yourself to this magical place than an experience of forest bathing or or nature therapy, which you're going to tell us more about. Mm-hmm. But as somebody who was kind of facilitating the retreat, it was such an awe-inspiring experience to witness women having kind of a similar experience to what I had felt. That they were coming from busy lives. They were coming from a lot of stress and a lot of responsibilities. And they traveled and had to deal with, airplanes and hotels and all the things. They landed on the ranch. And to watch them walk into the forest bathing experience and then also witness them walking out, they were different people. And I want to share that from the outset of this conversation because for the listener, I just really want them to grab onto this idea that no matter how wound up you are, no matter how stressed out, how dysregulated, however you want to label that, you feel, nature is always right there. And she is begging you to let her do her thing. And you are such an incredible guide to help us do that. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for saying all that, Courtney. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly from the heart. Like I really, I always say I don't sugarcoat. Like this, it just is my genuine experience. And I know that we've been talking about doing a podcast episode forever, and finally here we are.
Yeah.
But this is such simple and incredibly profound work that I really wish everybody would accept the invitation to start exploring it. Because I really think it is the key, not only to regulating our nervous systems, but to healing ourselves, like to heal our wholeness. We need to be in communion with nature on a regular basis.
I agree.
So all that being said, I would love you to tell listeners just a little bit about who you are and how you came to do this incredible work that you do in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Germany, which you may hear.
Yeah, you have a little bit of an accent.
Yes, a little bit. And I grew up outside pretty much. Like our house, it was an apartment, but it was like there was one more street and then it was fields and then it was forest. So I was out there all the time, playing there, walking to school, all of that. And all the vacations that we did as a family were always to the same little village in Austria. Yeah. So while I didn't grow up in the mountains, I think I have a very deep connection to the mountains. So when my husband and I first traveled to Montana in 2004, there was a strange pull to be here. And we kept talking about it. And so because my husband is a dual citizen, we immigrated in 2008. And I brought my corporate job with me and I did that. I started working remotely then and making lots of good money. But I felt drawn to do something different and picked up the breadcrumbs here and there. And eventually that led me to life coach training. And then all of that was happening remotely. And then specifically after the pandemic, I was like, I need to coach outside. Like I want to do this thing called nature-based coaching. And so I just made something up and did it. And it was so effective. And I just talked to somebody who was on one of those first practice walks in 2022. And she's like, I still think of that. I still think of the bird that was in the tree. And so I wanted to give it more structure. So I sought out nature therapy training.
Okay.
And that's where I landed where I am with combining those two modalities.
Yeah. I love that it sort of sparked, towards the tail end of COVID when we were so isolated, not just from nature. And I think maybe we experienced that a little bit less in Montana because a lot of us were maybe still out and about, but certainly the world at large was isolated in a lot of ways. And then also really isolated from community and that, face-to-face connection in the flesh rather than through Zoom and all this technology.
Right. The thought of just seeing another client on Zoom, I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Can we just go to the woods? Yeah.
So I'm curious because you did your life coach training with Martha Beck, who I adore and I have so much respect for. How did you enter those waters of starting to take that level of education and that capacity you had to help people and weave it together with the nature therapy and this experience of being outdoors and using that as a tool.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, my teacher is Martha Beck, and um, she wrote a whole book, Finding Your Way in the Wild New World, about nature connection. So that is not something that was new.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I think when I literally just made it up at first. I was like, okay, how can I bring coaching sessions and the tools that I know of helping my clients connect with their truth that is always there, they've just forgotten, and how can I bring that outside? And so I just made up this format, and it worked brilliantly. There was one woman who was like, if you're going to ask me to take off my shoes, I probably won't. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I was going to, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And then by 90 minutes later, she's like, I think I'm going to take off my shoes and dip my feet in the water. I'm like, you should. Put your feet in the creek. And it's a wonderful way to connect with your inner child also, and that is a great gateway to connecting with your true nature in nature. Just finding that inner child who used to jump in puddles and, look at the clouds.
Yeah. Witnessing, the retreat participants doing the forest bathing experience and having lots of conversations around that in the aftermath, there was so much talk about people having childhood memories and feeling childlike and really being re-inspired to play and just be outside for the sake of being outside, not to run or to hike or to swim, but just to be in nature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had the same experience. As a child, you play, you run, you jump, you roll down the grassy hill. And then, you learn from somewhere that as a grown-up, you don't do that. And so you don't. And it becomes like almost like a gym, I go out there to exercise and, and yeah, that's great. But if you're always just constantly trying to improve your Strava stats or close your move ring or whatever you're using to track, then you're missing out on so much connection and so much healing power whenever people go outside, that's great. I will never tell anybody to not do that, but it's just different when you just are rather than always do something.
It's so true.
I had the same experience. I hadn't just been sitting in nature by myself for years. That was just not something that I had the time for. And so when that became part of my training, at first there was a strong resistance.
Yeah.
And always was like, well, can I just look at my phone and, I could just write an email real quick, But it's like, no, I'm going to do that in 20 minutes.
And the email was still there. That too, that you start off by inviting, because everything you present is an invitation, which I also love, because you want people to meet themselves where they're at. But one of the things you're pretty firm on is not using the cell phone and keeping it in your pocket or in your car or turn it off, whatever the case may be, because of course it is such a distraction. Well, the reason I ask you about kind of the weaving together of life coaching and nature therapy is because I think so much of the work that we do in life coaching can challenge, obviously, a lot of beliefs we have about ourselves. They can certainly have us question, how we came to be in this place. And I think to reconnect with yourself on that level and be radically honest, there has to be this container of safety. And I don't know a better container for safety than nature, which is interesting because like the day that you and I went to Marshall Mountain, you were like, well, the bears are coming out of hibernation. Like there is wildlife. Of course, there are always threats. But compared to like kind of the threat in my head and my nervous system, that didn't scare me, right? It just it more than anything, it settled me.
Right.
It settled me. So do you find that like with all of your experience now of taking people on these into these nature therapy sessions, do you find that people are more open and connected in nature than they are through a Zoom call?
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly. Although you can also you can come on a remote walk with me via Zoom. I also offer that
Yes.
too, so you are outside, I'm outside, but we're in different places and we still can do the same thing. Anyway, but yeah, for during many a coaching session afterwards, I felt like, I don't know, we didn't really get to the core of it. And there was so much, she just needed to vent and vent and vent, which is great. I love that. Right.
Yeah.
But then at some point you want to move like past the story and into the, what's actually happening. And the more I learned about nervous system regulation, it's like, oh, they were in this heightened state. They were in a fight or flight nervous system state. And so, no, that's not a good state where you can start challenging your limiting beliefs, right? But you're not able to look past the top layers of what's going on, or even if you're even worse, if you're in a freeze response and everything is just too much, and you just want to, pull a blanket over your head. That's not a good place to go into inquiry about what's happening in your life. So, yeah, I've started to bring a little bit of a flavor of nature therapy sessions even into my Zoom calls. I ask them, what do you need? What does your body need right now? Do you feel like you need a breath or do you need to move?
Yeah.
And at first they're like, when we start working together, I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what are you asking me?
Right.
And I was like, just listen to your body compass right now. What do you need? Like, oh, I think I want to move. And it's like, okay, let's shake, right? And so like, no, I think I want, I feel like I need to, like, I need a breath, like I need a minute. And it's like, okay, then let's breathe for a minute. Let's invest a minute and just breathe and be and look out the window. And what do you see? So yeah, that's one of the ways I weave that together.
I love the way you said
Even
that
on
body
Zoom.
compass, like tapping into that body compass, because there is so much
Yes.
wisdom there. And there is, I think we have, in a way, been conditioned to obviously to disconnect from that, right? And someone else knows better. And this is just the way the structure is. And I should be in front of a computer screen for a gazillion hours a day. And so for someone just to pause and ask, like, what do you really need right now? I can see where people would be almost disoriented by that question.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And yet, I think it's all the more reason why we need to be asking that question so often, because the wisdom is there, but we have to be willing to pause and kind of check in and find out where that compass is pointing us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
You use the phrase midlife wilderness, which I love so much.
Yeah.
So I would love you to speak a little bit specifically to how nature therapy, how forest bathing, which really are one and the same. Like we're using those terms a little interchangeably. Is that correct to say?
There are nuanced differences, but for the container of this podcast, I think we should just use them.
We can use them interchangeably.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So specifically, let's talk about that midlife wilderness and how this type of work and being out in nature and really experiencing nature more in the way that you invite people to, how does that help a midlife woman beyond what we've already talked about? Like we talked about the container of safety, we've talked about feeling more connected, but what else is an extension of that?
Yeah. I would say it is a way of reconnecting with that inner compass, The midlife can feel like a wilderness. I'm in it,
Yeah,
and
you and me both.
sometimes you're just like, oh my God, I don't even know. It's a jungle.
Yeah.
And I don't even know, like between the parents and the kids and the dog and the church and whatever commitments else you have, work, career, retirement, it's a lot, you know,
And then
and
chemistry shifting alongside of that.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Waking up in the middle of the night, like in a puddle, like, oh gosh. And so it is, we are just thrown, it feels like to me, we were just thrown into the, like, okay, here you are. You know, your hormones are changing, your life is shifting, deal with it, you
Yeah.
know. And as you mentioned, we have lost either completely the connection to our inner compass, to our body compass, or we have learned to distrust it because we've had all these other outside influences telling us what to do and what not to do. This is what a girl does. This is what a girl doesn't do. This is what a woman looks like. This is what she doesn't do. This is what she wears. This is how she talks, you know? And so um, to come into nature and observe how nature, we haven't talked about swearing on your podcast. I think
Oh,
there's
you
no
can swear. It's
swearing on your
fine.
podcast.
Yeah. We just mark it as explicit, which is almost every episode.
Okay. um, and nature doesn't, the beings out there don't give a shit. They
They don't.
don't, they're so unpretentious, right? There is no shoulds and woulds and coulds and should
Yeah.
have. There's only I am. And
There's
that's it,
also no judgment.
right? There's no like, oh, I wonder if this tree is prettier than my, you know, like, I should trim my limbs. You know, it's like, sure, if I'm a ponderosa pine, I'm going to trim my limbs to make myself more resilient towards fire. But
Yeah.
there's no like, oh, what if I don't? You know, there's no. Humans have this single capacity, this unique capacity to stress ourselves out so much. I just heard Martha Beck talk about how humans are the only species that that is so creative about what might happen in the future, and our imagination is so vivid that some of us choose to rather commit suicide rather than live in this imagined world, you know. So to just be and observe and notice how everything is just going through cycles, and there is life and death, there is growth, and and ex- and uh, and uh, and pause. There is rest. There is
Imperfection.
seeding,
Yeah.
imperfection. Right? Who's to say which tree is perfect? I mean, we humans say like, "Oh, no, this is the perfect Christmas tree." It's like, who's to say you know, that's just some weird human aesthetic. And the more I feel my clients participate in just noticing this and relating it to how different they've been operating in the world, I think that's just eye-opening. That's just eye-opening to ask, like, who am I past these cultural demands and these social unwritten rules and the roles. Who am I when I'm not a daughter? Who am I when I'm not a wife? Who am I when I'm not a director of very important things? Who am I when I'm not the chairperson of the whatever committee? Who am
Yeah.
I?
Yeah.
Right? And she's there. She's always been there. Right? And I think midlife is a point for many of us where the essential self that's in here, our true nature, will no longer tolerate all the bullshit, right? We are
I think
pretty good at tolerating a lot of bullshit as
yeah.
women, right?
I always say, I think it's kind of the magic of losing the very hormones that allow us to tolerate stress. Truly, like I know we look at it as such a burden and such an inconvenience, but there's such a gift to it because, like you said, we get more intolerant of our own BS. And so then we're faced with a choice. I can either stay this way or I can start to experiment with different ways of being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And I think it's, I mean, you know so much more about hormones than I do, but I think it's also that we're losing the hormones that made us such great caretakers,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, if I'm, if I don't, if I'm not taking care of these other people, who might I take care of? Who might I take care of now?
Hmm. What a
Hmm.
concept, right? Absolutely. Well, I'm always like when with certain topics that I'm certainly by no stretch an expert on. I always love to do a little research before my interviews, and I want to read some stats because I think that
Mm,
this is really compelling for people to understand, listeners to understand how nature helps with
mhm.
our chemistry. Like it's
Oh, yeah.
literally not just a philosophy. We're not like there is actual evidence that it's shifting our chemistry. So a
So
few
much. I
studies that
have
I
like
thought
this whole pile of studies,
totally.
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight a few. And if you have
Yeah.
anything to share too,
Yeah.
please chime
Hmm.
in. But in 2019, there was a study published in Scientific Reports that found that women who spend at least 120 minutes per week in nature showed significantly reduced stress hormones and improved mood regulation compared to those who didn't. Research from the University of Michigan showed that forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, is that how you say
Yeah.
it?
That's the
Okay,
Japanese word for it. Yeah.
Shinrin Yoku, of just 20 minutes
Mhm.
significantly reduced cortisol. And they said by an average of around 14% in women aged 45 to 60. So just 20 minutes, that's a pretty significant drop. The International Journal of Environmental Research showed that midlife women who practiced mindfulness in nature settings experienced a 31% improvement in cognitive function and working memory.
Right.
And I want to highlight that word they use, the mindfulness in nature, because I really
Hmm.
feel like that is what you challenged me to
Hmm.
do in the work that I've done with you. And certainly I've witnessed you doing that with retreat participants and whatnot as well. Is it's not again just being in nature. It's like, can we be fully present and mindful
Hmm.
of how we're being in nature and what nature is doing all around us, which I can think of so many moments where, you had us observing nature. And initially I'm thinking there's nothing happening. There's no wind, there's no sound, there's nothing. But then the longer you look, all of a sudden it's like everything starts to come to life. And you
Hmm.
see the movement and you see the patterns and you hear the sounds.
Hmm.
But that requires such a level of awareness that, man, have we lost, right? We're not
Yeah.
even aware of what we're eating for breakfast, let alone like the little bug that's crawling on the blade of grass.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I always start my sessions, the nature therapy sessions, with this meditation
Yes.
called Pleasures of Presence that is really there to turn on and awaken all the senses, right? It's really taking you like touch, smell, taste. And that's really there's a purpose to having that in the beginning. And then always next comes the what's in motion, right? Where it's like, okay, now we're moving into that space where now we're awakened and what do we notice? And then we can become more playful and,
Yeah.
but there is always this sequence of guiding people slowly into this process where then, in my training, they always said, nature is the therapist and the guide opens the doors. I'm not a therapist,
Yeah.
but nature is, but I am trained to open the doors. And that's why, people are like, well, I could just sit in the forest. I'm like, yeah, you can. Like you can practice yoga at home,
Sure.
right? You don't need to go to a studio. But there is something about my training that is really helpful and to do it in a group, right? You mentioned connection too, and loneliness is such a detriment to our mental health in this isolation. The older we get, the more isolated and lonely humans feel. And to be able to connect with the other participants on the walk, as much as we reconnect with nature and ourselves, is a huge benefit. I think that's why we like going to the yoga studio, right? Because we're doing it in communion and it does feel different. And there's a guide who keeps track of time and has thought about the flow, and you don't need to come up with anything, right? You just show up, and then in the end you get a snack and a tea, and and then you sleep very well.
It's so true. And beyond, all of that, which is so, to me, was so powerful because you're right. I can go into nature anytime, but doing it in the way that you invited me to is something quite different. And also, I think you do such a brilliant job, especially in groups, of protecting the container, which to me is like you make it very clear, like, you'll ask certain questions after certain invitations, but you also ask the rest of the group just to listen and not respond. And that too is a practice that I think we have lost. We don't
Such an important
listen
skill.
to just listen. We listen to respond and react and all the things. And so I think that, the work just has so many layers. And so I know that most listeners do not live in Montana, but I would invite them because you do sessions through, like you said, you do sessions virtually where you're both in nature and you're still doing the same type of guidance that you would be doing in person. And I cannot stress to people listening enough that if you want to gift yourself a really unique experience that will truly, I think, be something that you carry with you the rest of your life, a session like this could be life-altering because it is showing you a different way of looking at something that you think you've seen, like you think you've experienced, but you really haven't. So obviously I'm a big fan. I think you should do it.
It creates a lot of new synapses in the brain, right? It is this... There's always so much more than what we think that there is. And that is just such an important lesson for every part of life. It's like there's always something that we cannot yet see. And
Yeah. And there's also this, certainly there's a lot more research and definitely conversation around the importance of getting out into sunlight every day and, getting the light into our eyes and breathing in the air of nature and being around plants, which you've taught me helps our immune system.
Yeah.
Right. So the advantages, they just reach so far. Okay. So let's maybe talk a little bit about gateways for someone who maybe they're not ready to have a session yet, or it's just not the right time, or they're not in a place, where they can do that right now. How do we get people to enter these waters in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming? Because I know some of the logistical reasons that we don't make time for this type of work. We're so busy.
Yeah.
But also we're so uncomfortable being quiet. Right?
Yeah.
Like I would say that's a barrier. A lot of people aren't comfortable just not doing anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. My favorite invitation is called Sit Spot, and it's as simple as it is difficult. Right? It's simple as it is what it says it is. You just pick a spot and you sit. Yeah. But that's also the hard part. And it was part of my training, and they made us do it multiple times a week. I mean, there's no police, right? They couldn't tell whether we were doing it. The training was at that part very much remote. But I think they could tell if people had engaged in it because it changes you and it was that long, hard, never-ending winter here in Montana. So I sat outside in a blizzard. I sat outside in the rain. I sat out, and I just did it. And oh my God, after I could always tell, like clockwork, after 10 minutes, I was like, just look
You're
at the
agitated,
phone.
yeah.
It's like, I got things to do. And then if I managed, which I was pretty good at, because I was really curious about how it would impact me. And then always, still to this day, after 20 minutes, I was like, wait, did the timer just go off? It was just so beautiful. I don't want to go inside. And sometimes I just keep sitting. So just sit without purpose It is such a strange concept. It is even different. I feel even in meditation, I feel like we're trying to achieve something.
Right. Like
At sit spot,
even not thinking is
right.
work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. But to just sit there and, I mean, the only requirement is that you don't bring a book, you don't bring a phone, you don't bring, you just sit. And I'm doing it in my backyard. People can do it behind a window. You can do it just looking out the window. You can be under, by the tree in the parking lot at work. It doesn't really matter. You can do it in a big city. You can go to a park, or you can go, you can do it with a house plant for all I care. Like it's all nature. Like my desk is made out of wood. That is nature, right?
Yeah.
So nature is everywhere. We are nature, right? That is such an important thing to realize. And yeah, so just start sitting. And 20 minutes is great. I know that seems like a lot, and I always say you can ease yourself into it. Start with a minute. Set your timer to a minute and see if you want to stop after 1 minute. And then do 5, do 10, to do 20. And those statistics that you just read, they're so compelling. You can solve so many mental and physical health issues by just engaging in that a little more. So just sit. And then I also have for your listeners a recording that I did of the Pleasures of Presence meditation that I mentioned.
Oh,
It's about
perfect.
20 minutes long. And you can just put it on your phone and you can have me guide you through
Oh, brilliant.
this
Okay.
awakening of the senses, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's a good way. And there's a website called Forest Bathing Finder, and
Okay.
I'll get the link to you. And there, people can find people who do this work all over the world, right?
Yeah.
You can type in your location and you can find somebody. I'm pretty sure there's somebody who
Yeah.
offers it.
Well, I started this episode talking about that experience I had with you on Marshall Mountain, and I was so amped up that day. And I think what
Mhm.
was so profound for me is when I left Marshall Mountain, I felt just like I was in a radically different space. I was clear headed, I was calm, and all the outside world still existed. All my problems were still there. The to do list was still full. Like again, I hadn't changed my circumstances,
Mhm.
but just taking that little bit of time to observe what was alive around me
And how alive
was
you are.
right. And I think that's what it just kind of reinforced. Like it brought it,
Mhm.
I always say, like to me, healing is putting more life in your life. And
Mhm.
and being on that mountain that
Mhm.
day and being a part of so much life, which somebody who wasn't aware could say there's nothing alive around me, but it's all alive. When you start looking, it's all moving and it's all, intricately dancing together. And so
Mhm.
yeah, leaving the mountain, I definitely felt like I was so much more alive. And now you might be happy to hear this. My son is 15 now, but we still do this where we'll
Mhm.
go for walks and we just collect things that are interesting to us, right? And we kind of share them at the end of our walk, like why we picked it up, and then we leave it.
Mhm.
Or we just look for really interesting things along the walk to point out to each other. And it's like we're able to be in nature together in the experience in such a deeper way than I would have been had I never done this work with you. And again, it sounds crazy coming out of my mouth. Like, why would I need a guide to actually help me improve my relationship with nature?
Mhm.
But until you try it, it's, I'll just say try it because I think you will be very pleasantly surprised that it
I
just
agree.
awakens the world around you in
Yeah.
such a big way.
Yeah. And me
Um,
too. I was like, okay, let me get to the summit. Let me do it a little faster than I did last time. And now I'm like, oh, I'm ruining everybody's Strava
yeah. Right?
statistics, right? Because I was like, oh, look at that.
Oh, that's funny. Well,
Let
I,
me
I
look at this
definitely,
moss.
before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you because last year you ran your first retreat where you
Yeah.
put how many women? Was it 10 women?
Yep. Hmm.
10 women in boats, and you went
Hmm.
down. Which river were you on?
The main Salmon River in
The
Idaho.
main Salmon River. Okay, so tell us a
Hmm.
little bit about that.
Yeah. So I did it with my colleague who is also a nature therapy guide and also a mother back coach. And we felt like we wanted to offer something super deep, right? It is what happens if you don't drive home after the 3 hours? What happens if you just do it again the next day? And when there is no cell phone reception, there isn't even, there's no temptation.
Right.
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 You know that the guides have a satellite phone in case something tragic happens, if something major happens, you're safe. But what is it like to sleep in nature? And most of the women there had never done that. They hadn't camped. I think none of them had ever been on a multi-day river trip and in this routine of like setting up, taking down, setting up, taking down. 2 days in, one of the women was like, I can't do it. I hate this. I have to be honest. This is just not for me. And then by the end, she was like, she signed up again. Like she's coming again this year, right? Because it was so
transformative.
And they learned how strong they are and how resilient they are and how much they can help each other. It was beautiful to see, to have women ask each other for help, ask the guides for help. It was beautiful. Yeah. So 1 week of full immersion in this beautiful landscape of Idaho was amazing. Yeah. And this year we're going on the Rogue River in Oregon, which is such a different landscape, but yeah, I can't wait.
And it's in September, is that right, this year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you still have spots left?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll put those details on the page where this is found as well. So we have lots of resources for you listening to tap into different ways of experiencing nature. So excellent. Any parting words you have for listeners? Anything that you would like to say in closing?
I think, even if after listening to all of this, you might feel skeptical, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to do this, but if there is this little spark of curiosity and it's like, oh, I wonder what happens if I sit in my backyard without weeding or pruning or sowing or,
without doing.
What happens without doing? Who am I when I am? Where am I when I am? Just give it a try. I think, follow your curiosity. That's what I always say with the invitations. Follow my invitations or don't, but follow your curiosity. So
absolutely,
stay curious.
And I love that you have that guided meditation too, which we'll put in the resources because I think that could really help people to like give them a starting point. For doing that. So good. Well, I think I've expressed my profound enthusiasm for the practice, and more than the practice, just your work in general, your energy, who you are embodying, like the way that you are moving through the world. I think it's such a testament to the work that you're doing. Like you walk, you talk.
It feels good to be seen that way.
No, I definitely see that in a big way, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you,
my friend. Can we all just
friend.
take a deep breath before before the podcast finishes? Can we close with one deep breath?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Okay. Before you, do whatever you're going to do next, just take a deep breath. Like breathe in, breathe out. And notice what you're noticing. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks for having me.
Oh, always. I'm always privileged to be with you. Thank you for making the time. And I'm sure I will be seeing more of you in the future. But thank you for doing this today. I think it'll benefit a lot of people.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.